This lesson is going to involve painting the pillows on a leaf. This is a hydrangea leaf, and as you can see from this particular leaf, pillowing is fairly obvious. You see it in the smaller sections on the blade. As you learned in drawing 2, you have fundamental features for a leaf. You have a midrib, you have 2 blades, you have secondary veins if they are there. They will be recessed, as will the midrib, from the blade of the leaf. If we turn this over, you'll see just the opposite. The midrib and the secondary veins are all raised off the surface of the blade, and you can also see some highlights indicating the pillowing or these tertiary veins that are also part of the structure of this leaf. When painting this leaf, it's really important to understand this basic structure first before we start to talk about pillowing. As with any botanical illustration, it is very important for you to start with a good, well-studied drawing. Now that I have my preliminary drawing done, I will lay another piece of tracing paper over the top of this and refine that drawing based on the leaf that I have in front of me. So here is my finished drawing. I have put in all of the venation, including the very subtle pillow areas. This will now be transferred to good paper. When we start to think about matching colors, it's important to really match colors to the original specimen. And we'll make some notes as to what colors we've mixed so that if we have to, we can mix them again. The reason that I'm showing you the photograph is because the photograph was taken of this specimen under scientific lighting and was taken when the specimen was fresh off the bush. And it's much easier to see where the pillowing takes place and where the shadows fall on the subject. It is my recommendation that for you to have some understanding of what these shadows are doing is to do a quick shadow study using tracing paper and marking and with your 2H pencil or an HB pencil how the shadows are going to form. And you don't have to render the entire subject. You just need to render some of it so you have a sense of what these shadows are doing and how they're going to look. I'm going to render a small section in here because there are definite shadows. I can still see the value of the midrib, and I can see where the pillowing is taking place on this specimen. I've drawn a small square, and as you can see, I have blocked in just with a very light, even tone for the lightest value on the specimen itself. That would be, in fact, where the midrib and any secondary ribs show up within this square. Here is our second layer of value. It just shows that the blade is, at this point, darker than the midrib and the secondary veins. Our next step will be to put in the contours for the value of the blade. What we're going to do now is we're going to start thinking in terms of graded tones. First, primary shadows along the midrib and along the secondary veins in order to get the change in value based on the lighting and on the general surface. We are going to ignore all the pillowing at this point. Here is our third step in the process where the shading is now defining the form of the leaf. On the left-hand side, you can see the entire leaf is now much darker because it goes away from the light. Even the secondary rib has more value added to it as opposed to the right. You will notice that on the right side, the shadow for the main structure of the blade is very close to the secondary rib, and then it grades out to a much lighter space. Now that we have this basic form, which is the true form of the leaf, we can go in and we can start to put in pillowing. Pillowing is basically little mini transitional shadows that define each one of the little tertiary veins that break up the main blade areas. And since each one of those has its own sculptural form, it is what creates the pillowing. Or the shading along these veins, these tertiary veins, will be similar or the same as the ones that are your primary shadow definition. Here is the final value study. You can see that I've added tertiary veins and added in some cases where the tertiary vein is relatively deep, which indicates the pillowing, that there's a little bit more tonal gradation. Otherwise, it's a light, delicate line that is part of the movement on those veins. You'll see that also on the shadow side of this particular leaf, there's very little tertiary vein and pillowing. If we had a much more sculpted leaf, you would see some more shadowing in the shadow area, as well as in the light area on the leaf. So this process of doing this gradation with graphite gives you a very clear understanding of the steps that you're going to have to take when you do the actual color.